Hey, okay, fishermen, we're going to talk here just a little bit of making sure your hooks are good and sharp. Before I tie most all my flies, I make sure that I have a good hook that is sharp. And there's all types of hooks on the market today. There's pre-sharpened hooks. Some of those hooks cost you $1, $2 a piece. And I'd just like you to know that I'm still back in where I can't afford that kind of hooks to make all the flies that I need to make and use. So a standard saltwater hook, stainless steel hook, can be made to run itself through your thumbnail if you have to, and stick in bones and little crevices like that. And I'll tell you, it's very, very important to have a sharp hook. There's a lot of mouths of fish that bite down and crush other fish that have very sharp bones in them. And to protect that fish's mouth, those bones are made so they don't penetrate and ruin a fish or injure the fish itself. If your hook is not sharp, that hook is not going to stick in that fish in any particular place. So a sharp hook is probably the most important thing in tying a fly. At least it is when I go fishing. I make sure all my hooks or points are sharp. We have files around that you can use. This is a fine file. It's made by Andy Renzetti, the same fellow that makes the vices, and it's called the Clouser hook file. I certainly recommend it because it's a file that I use to keep my hook sharp when I decide to tie a fly. And a hook sharp will actually hook you, and you'll be able to land more fish than you did with a dull hook. And if you make just 3 swipes, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you should be able to take that hook and stick it in your thumbnail itself. And it's a tent-shaped figurine where you lay the vise or the file on the one outer side of the hook first, and you push 3 times. 1, 2, 3. I think you can probably hear the grinding of the file as it grinds away the metal on the hook. And I'm going to lay it on this side, do the same thing. Tilt it, 2, 3. And somehow, if I turn this, you might be able to see the light glinting on those points. Okay, now I'm going to take it out of the vise. Okay, we're going to give it the test where there it is. It's sticking right in that thumbnail. Hi, I'm Bob Clouser, and I'm going to show you how to tie the Clouser minnow. And also, if you have a lot of different thoughts about how to put different types of flies together, I also have a book that just came out called Clouser's Flies, and inside the booklet will be all the instructions that you need to follow in order to tie the Clouser minnow. And of course, just not only the Clouser minnow is in there, all of my favorite patterns that I developed over the years are also in here with all clear tying instructions, very good photographs, and even how to fish them. Okay, I'm going to show you how to tie the Clouser minnow. And the first thing is that we're going to attach a bump of tying thread at the 1/3 point of the hook, the entire length of the hook. A lot of measurements most of the times are done maybe just with the hook shank itself, but I measure 3 places on the full hook. This would be the first 1/3 place, here's your second 1/3 place, and here's your third place. So when you make that bump on there, you can take the barbell eye and lay it on the shaft of the hook and push it up till you feel the bump, and you make cross wraps. Okay, we're cross wrapping this way, and then I just straighten the eyes up and cross wrap the opposite direction. Cross wrap again, and then use a circular wrap between the eyes and the hook shank. That tightens the bundle of the tying thread up. Show it here to you a little bit better. Just turn that. Okay, now the eyes are attached to the hook, and of course if you want to at this time, you may use some super glue and glue this thread bump that's on the bottom of the hook. Put the super glue right here, glue the thread hump to the hook shank itself. Now we're going to move forward, and I like to just spiral the tying thread forward till I get behind the hook eye and come back to the halfway point between the eye of the hook and the eyes of the fly. That's your starting point to attach deer hair, piece of deer hair. This is the bucktail, and we're going to attach a piece of bucktail, especially white, for the belly. I'm going to cut it off of the hide, and I'm going to lay it right on top of that hook shank. Now you got to remember the fly turns upside down, so this is going to be the belly. Trim it nice and flat, and I'm going to hold this back so you can see a little better. This is where the tying thread's at, and I like to tilt the bundle of deer body hair so it touches the hook shank right in front of the tying thread, and then make a loose collective wrap and pull it down tightly to the hook and just wrap the tying thread forward. That's your first attachment. Then we're going to move the tying thread behind the eyes and hold the tying or the bucktail clump itself away from the hook shank. Don't leave it touch that shank. And we're going to use the tying thread to pull it in place. 2 wraps, and spiral back to that 2/3 place right there. Make a little light turn, spiral forward to in back of the eyes. Now we're going to move the tying thread to the next tying position, which will be in back of the eye of the hook. It's like that. Now this thing can be turned upside down. I use a rotating vise so I don't have to take the hook out and turn the fly upside down. Maybe 8 to 10 strands of crystal flash. This is going to be the center part of the fly, and in order to tighten it down, we're going to have to fold the tying equipment here, the crystal flash, over the tying thread and pull it down on top of the hook shank. If you always lift up on your material and wind back over it, it will stay on top of the hook shank instead of following the thread around the hook and you having crystal flash sticking out like whiskers on some kind of wild cat or a catfish or something like that. Now, if you look closely, the tying thread is in the same position as it was when we started our first tying sequence. We're going to take our back collar, which in this case is chartreuse. We're going to cut it off of the deer tail, and we're going to make a measurement which is usually as long as or a little shorter than the belly portion. Cut it flat, and we're going to attach this on a downward angle. This is the bottom of the flat cut. There's a flat cut, and this is the bottom, and we're going to touch it to the top of the hook shank just in front of the tying thread. And we're going to make a loose collective wrap, and we're going to lift up on the bobbin and just wrap tightly forward. It'll form a nice cone-shaped head and attach the top part of the fly for you. Now, all of us like to make neat little heads, and I'll just doctor this up a little bit and try to make sure that it looks like a cone. And then I'm going to take a whip finish tool and going to finish this off. Okay, now this is the completed Clouser minnow, Clouser deep minnow we should say, and if you want to finish this fly off, you can use head cements on it, but I prefer to cover the eyes and all the bare thread spaces and the head with 30-minute epoxy, and then put it on a turning wheel and let it turn. Okay, after your Clouser minnow is complete, all the tying steps are all done in it, I like to protect the eyes and also glue the eyes fast to the hook shank. In a lot of instances, when you're epoxying flies, what I've seen a lot of mistakes in tying this minnow is that they tie the head tight against these eyes. And when that tying thread forces itself back against here, it will close up this gap that you can now see in the fly, and that gap is left there so the epoxy soaks in underneath those eyes and gets onto the hook shank. If you just coat the whole head with epoxy without having epoxy going to the hook shank, you can take literally and turn the head around itself. The first thing that I do, of course, is I have the epoxy mixed, and I'm going to take and run a little bead right over the tying threads itself. And then I'm going to run the bead of the epoxy over top of the material down to in back of the eye on the threads. Then I'm going to take another swipe of epoxy, and I'm going to drop it on the eye and force it in the groove in front of the eye. Then I'm going to do the other side here. You'll be able to see that I go over top of the eye and force it into the open groove in front of the eye. Now I'm going to turn it upside down, and I'm going to rub the epoxy over top of the tying threads. You can see this whole entire tying, the place that we all tied down on the hook, is now coated with epoxy. And then, of course, this is 30-minute epoxy we're using, so we're going to have to take the fly and put it on a turning wheel. While it's turning, it'll keep itself nice and smooth. There'll be no lumps on the finished fly.